Welcome back, friends. In this episode, we switch from beer to wine.
Jump in as we take you on our quick tour of Portugal.
We departed Munich and arrived in Porto via Lisbon. So this was our Portugal trip. Julie and Rob joined us for this part of it, so we're down to 4. Thank you to Julie for all the planning that you did, booking the Airbnbs. It was great. You did a lot of the legwork on this one, and we had a great time. We had great places to stay. Porto is a beautiful city. What do we like about Porto?
Well, first thing that struck me, I had bought a new camera just before this part of our travels, and I was struck by all the tile on all the buildings, well, so many buildings, and just tile everywhere, really unique, narrow walking streets, and I just couldn't resist. I had to hustle to keep up with you guys because I kept falling behind just taking pictures and playing with my camera. A very picturesque city for starters.
For sure, and very hilly.
Yeah, there is no flat area in Porto to be found.
And on our first kind of big day in Porto, we did a city walking tour. The 4 of us walked around, kind of saw the sights. So we did a lot of walking up and down and saw a lot of tile. And then we went on across the river to where all the big port companies are. And we actually did a port tasting and tour at one of the big companies, Callum.
Callum, yep.
Yeah, and so we learned all about port and got to try some great ports.
So port is basically like a wine, but fortified. And so to do that, essentially you add really strong alcohol to halt the fermentation process, but which also makes it a very strong drink between sort of 17 and 22% alcohol. So this is not something you'd sip with dinner. It's something you might have before or after dinner. It's a pretty rich, sweet, strong beverage, and they come in a white port, a red port, or our favorite, which is aged in barrels, was the red tawny port, which has kind of honey flavors and just a really nice. It's just a delicious drink, yeah.
We didn't realize there were so many ports. That's to do a rosé port, which is kind of nice in like a sangria. But what we really liked is you can mix the white port with tonic, and it's kind of instead of a gin and tonic. And that's actually a really refreshing drink as well. So
that one's refreshing. I would still say tawny port would be my favorite.
Especially drinking it on its own.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So our port tasting and education didn't stop just there in Porto and across the river. The next day we actually did a day bus trip up into the Douro Valley, which is where the grapes are grown to make your port and have been for a lot of years. So up the Douro Valley, where we had a couple more tastings, we had lunch out, we had a nice cruise on the river with a view of the terraced vineyards up there as well. So here's a little montage of our day trip up the Douro Valley. So next up, it was time to head on from Porto towards Lisbon, which would be our endpoint here in Portugal, with an overnight stop in Coimbra. On the way there, we actually took a stop off in Aveiro for a quick lunch and a walk along the canal. For this part of the journey, we actually rented a car just to have a little more freedom of deciding where we wanted to be and what we wanted to see. But that first day, it was a pretty easy drive up to Coimbra, and what did we find there?
Coimbra is really known for its university. It's kind of at the top of this hill, so again, a lot of climbing. And the highlight of the university is the old library that was built in the 1700s. It's just a really beautiful library. It contained a bunch of old volumes. You have to get a ticket to enter, and there's no photography allowed, so sorry, no pictures, but great experience. The university itself was pretty cool too. We kind of explored and got a couple other shots, some of the other buildings on campus. And
just a nice stroll around, out for a beer, out for supper, and then on the road again.
Yep.
And our next stop the next day was in Nazaré, which, if you're like us or like anybody that watches Netflix, you've probably seen The 100-Foot Wave, a documentary about extreme surfers that look for the biggest waves, and it is centered around this town of Nazare, which has the biggest waves in the world. Well, the day we were there, waves weren't so big. Crowds were fairly big, lots of tourists around, and we hit the weather quite well. It was sort of raining off and on, but we got in a nice stroll on the beach in between rain showers, and another chance to play with my camera, and just sort of nice to dip your toes in the sand and see some pretty sizable waves and see this place that you had only seen on TV.
So we kicked off our tour of Lisbon with a city walking tour. This was kind of pay what you feel, and so you joined the tour and then you just kind of tip at the end. It was 3 hours long. We did 3 or 4 neighborhoods, a lot of walking. It was a great tour. It was super informative, give us a kind of great overview of Lisbon, of the kind of center of Lisbon. So that was kind of our first day, and of course we had some great meals out, and we found this cute little pub steps from our apartment called the Queen Ale, and so we did spend some time there as well.
Another neat cocktail bar we found was the Pavilhão Chinês, or the Chinese Market. I think it used to be a Chinese supermarket, but this fellow had bought it mostly to display his vast collection of mostly army-related memorabilia and action figures and helmets. My friend JP would just absolutely love this. So we had some delicious cocktails there and enjoyed the vibes. The other interesting stop that we had, this was our first weird museum of this part of our travels, was the Doll Hospital right in the center of Lisbon. This has been in operation for apparently 180 years, where children bring their dolls to have them repaired, their limbs replaced, etc. People now mail dolls from all over the world to have them repaired by their expert doctors. And this was equal parts, I thought, weird and kind of charming. It was kind of neat. They refer to each of the dolls as their patients and have little tags on them as to what they need remedied. But a fun little tour there and a few shots of that for you.
And they also had quite an extensive doll collection as well at the hospital, so it was pretty neat overall.
And a room just of donor dolls, basically, that sadly we're not going to see the outside world again, but we're there because they might have an arm or a leg or a head that they are in need of. So thank you to them.
We booked a full day tour of Sintra. This is a small, beautiful town, very touristy, very popular, just outside of Lisbon. And it's got some big highlights. Actually, the whole area of Sintra is considered a UNESCO World Heritage Site. So our first stop was the Palace, Peña Palace. Unfortunately, it was a bit fogged in, so we didn't have great views because it is kind of up on the hilltop. But the architecture itself that we saw was really neat, and just kind of the stories behind it.
Shortly after that, we get over to the Quinta de Regularia, I think it is called, or Monteiro the Millionaire's Castle. This kind of reminded me of Hearst Castle in California, which we did last season, where it's rich guy builds castle. And this was again in the early 1900s that he built this out. In this case, it also had some themes of masonry and the Knights Templar, including this well that was 27 meters deep, and you could walk down a spiral staircase down the well, and it led into a series of a few different caves. And the idea was an initiate would do this blindfolded, and if you could find your way out to the waterfall, you were welcomed into the Brotherhood, I guess. We were not blindfolded, so no Brotherhood for us, but we enjoyed our visit nonetheless.
We had one day left in Lisbon after Rob and Julie left, so we saw them off, and then we headed to the Tile Museum.
This is probably one of those situations where it's good that we don't have children, because they might have found this one pretty boring, hanging around there for about 3 hours. We found it really interesting, the history of tile making, the Arabic influence in the region, even some of the more modern tile designs. So a really nice last stop in Lisbon. Do you know what time it is?
No, what time is it?
It's time for a funky tile montage. Let's go. That just about wraps up our time in Portugal. Holly, your final thoughts?
Final thoughts, beautiful country, hills, amazing food, great drink, really good prices as well, especially compared to the rest of Europe, I thought. Yourself?
I really like the tiles. That was very unique to this country and this region, something I hadn't seen before. And I really enjoyed kind of going deep on Port, understanding it, visiting the Douro Valley, really gave me a new appreciation for it.
For sure. I mean, it was pretty busy with all the tourists. That I'd say be the only downside is it's popular, and I can see why.
So, time to move on. Where are we headed next?
Next up, we go to a very, very hot place.
We're stopping off for a little stay over in Doha, in Qatar, just for about 48 hours. It's a toasty one. Crank up your air conditioning. We'll see you soon.